Oh,
Thank you,
yes.
Jason. All right, team. I don't see a lot of questions that have been outstanding. There are a few here, and I think I'm going to ask, I see a couple of them are for Ben. I think Anita's question is an interesting one for some of the same folks on that panel. And so for some of those, I think I might pull them into the Slack channel and we'll continue answering them there. But I do want to encourage anybody who's left here to ask some questions, because you essentially have some time with me as I reflect on what we've learned today for a bit of an Ask Me Anything with myself, and to kind of work together on reflections from our day. So I've got a couple thoughts, and I'm going to take us a little bit on a reflection on the road we just traveled. So you can leave up the roadmap. It's not a terrible way for us to go back a slide or bring it back up. Yeah. Thank you. So I want to scroll all the way back to the discussion with Waymo. And I'm, one, very grateful. They're not an obvious player for a cybersecurity awareness month, or a vendor that you'd bring in. So I'm very grateful that both Stacy and Gabe were willing to talk to us. And I'm pretty intrigued by the way they exposed a couple very different types of ways of thinking about this. If you think of the work that Stacy was talking about, those are industrial designers who are thinking about, and engineering designers who are thinking about the architecture of key fob and where data is passing back and forth between yourself, a vehicle, and in some cases, even your house. That's not a typical space that we might think of when it comes to cybersecurity. So I really appreciated them bringing that to bear. And I really appreciated that, that Stacy talked about, you're not just designing for success, but you're designing for failure. That industrial design is really thinking about that you've got this element of trying to anticipate what could go wrong, and then in a kind of resilience engineering, trying to plan for that and make as agile your processes as possible. That's something I really thought was an aha moment for me out of what Stacy brought to the table. I also appreciated, as Gabe picked that up, one, that we got to hear from a privacy officer and a company that I think is really innovating in this space and kind of taking us into territory that that is somewhat new for all of us. I liked the idea that he said. He kind of brought in a discussion around protecting our own privacy, but that by doing that, we're not only protecting ourselves, but we're also facilitating that capability with marginalized groups. Because as we're having this discussion, everybody gets stronger when we actually look at the systems that we're going to put in place to address them. So a couple thoughts from Waymo. Any aha moments from those of us that have been here all day? If you want to add them into the Slack or into the, you can tell I'm a Slack user. I'd be happy to kind of amplify your voices if you want to type them in. We then pivoted into a discussion around consent. And I think this is really important. That moment when you click on the cookie consent, there are two things that happen. One, you don't click on it. And I'd be curious in the Slack for anybody who doesn't click on it, whether or not they feel like the experience they have on the other side of saying no feels like a different experience than what they would have anticipated that experience to look like had they clicked yes to the cookie consent. And then the other piece of it is, like if you're in an app, like in a web, you can say yes or no. If you're in an app, like critical parts of the experience that you're about to have may not work very well. So it's not a terribly consensual thing. In fact, some of these require that you do that before you can actually use or register to be able to get onto said new social media app. So I'm very curious from those of you that are in the Slack, I'm trying to get you to talk to us a little bit about, at that moment that you're clicking, what's really going through your head. Jamie kind of came at this, Jamie Winterton this morning, kind of came at it and stated that the first thing you have to do is step back from the keyboard and think about the things that you actually want to be safe from. Like, give yourself that moment to think, if I were not to give consent, like what could I anticipate happening? That moment of reflection, I think, would also greatly inform how we then think about the interactions that we're trying to create, especially when it comes to our students. Then Bobby brought up some wonderful work, and I'm looking forward to sharing. She shared some resources that we'll share after this in other formats, but you've also got them in the Slack channel if you're there. She shared with us some work that she's doing to take terms of service and swap them into, pivot into, terms we serve with. And I think that's such an elegant transition for something that, for the most part, has been kind of a legal relationship of sorts, or at least from the company that's asking you to click on the terms of service, covering legal bases, to really pivoting that around and thinking about who we're serving with. I have tea here, so give me a minute. Thank you for that, team. Deborah, I thought her insights, and for any of you who know the company Proofpoint, here at ASU, you may not have encountered them, but they're one of the key components that we use to basically help us from data loss prevention, flagging instances where somebody might inadvertently and not realizing it sent out a social security number or something when they shouldn't have. I really appreciated that she pointed out that some of our language doesn't always serve us. So she had this moment where she talked about negligent or careless or weakest link, places where we might actually be in some ways disparaging of our own community members, that one individual who carelessly did something that then threatened and endangered the rest of our environment. I really agree with her that there's an element of that that creates a more defensive culture. I think she framed it as a more defensive culture. And that's not where we want to be. On our own teams here at ASU, we have a phenomenal young woman, Alyssa, and she talks a lot about the language that we're using and how we're approaching these things. I think all teams need to be really mindful of that. So definitely appreciated Deborah's point there. I also agree with her on the point of alert fatigue. And so I think we saw some threads of that as we went later into the conversations. If we're going to design systems around consent, if we're going to try to give individuals more nuance as to how to control what comes at them and what they send out into the world, we have to be really, really mindful that we're not just barraging them with a tremendous amount of burden and task. Ben mentioned that a little bit too. So absolutely, totally agree with Deborah on that point. I loved our conversation with Shayla and absolutely loved the opportunity that Sam facilitated with us to think blue sky. And one of the things that Shayla mentioned was that security should work for you, not against you. And I think that's a lovely thing to pull in from some of the other comments that really resonated with me as we went through the morning. If we're really talking about trusted experiences, then there is a sense of safety, security, confidence, that we really do feel like this is working with us, that it's helping us towards what we're trying to achieve, as opposed to being these kind of awkward blocks in the way, that moment when you have to turn keys and locks, and it's more of a task that you're trying to accomplish necessarily than something that's actually helping to propel you along your way. So after that conversation, we went in to talk to Ryan and Chloe and Jim and Joe and of course Jason around what's happening here in the state of Arizona. And I just think that's really great. Not only is the opportunity to actually bring some of this capability to K through 12, to small cities that don't have the ability to access some of the tools that would really help protect them. But even more than that, I love the fact that it's creating this really interesting network, that it's drawing people together to then say, how are you solving this challenge? Or, oh, we've seen this in the last couple of weeks. How are you guys approaching it? There's nothing like creating a network that makes us all smarter together. And I think it's a lovely byproduct for the work that the state's doing, that they're actually forging those kinds of relationships inside of each of our local areas. So I thought that was absolutely beautiful. And Chloe kind of brought in a lot of those conversations too, I think, where she talked about pulling all of our people together. So from there, we went and started talking about our open science and open source teams. And I love Janet's comments around citizen science. and really thinking deeply about this. What are those porous membranes between the world of research and the world of science, and then making that science more accessible to individuals or to other research teams that could start thinking and would probably come at looking at that data in really different ways. I think Jim's comment from the Linux Foundation and his work in public health, that policy begets architecture, and then architecture begets policy. I think that's really interesting. I think for the most part, both words, policy and architecture, can feel like kind of heady intellectual things. But in some ways, if I can yet again abuse our metaphor for the entire summit, the rubber hits the road when you're actually having to then do that. When you're thinking, okay, I'm going to put a open science opportunity in front of a research team. I'm going to encourage citizen scientists to work with us. I'm going to look at computational algorithms that have wisdom coming in from a diverse community that's all participating in a GitHub. At that moment, you've got to then decide what the rules are, like what are the terms of engagement for how we work together, and that then informs what we actually build in terms of the architecture that's available to us. So I loved that thought from Jim. And then ending with Jason as we closed out our day, I'm very appreciative of both the personal side of how he approached the discussion around equity. And I'm going to be thinking a lot, Jason, if you're still with us, about that framework between digital access and digital trust, then being the two things that are really required for us to go into equity. So that's a set of things that I drew from today. We are at about 2:53. So I think I will take a minute and allow us to keep the conversation going in the chat. We'll kind of roll this into an Ask Me Anything for anybody who wants to ponder or to bring up and raise some of the questions that we've had today. We still have quite a few folks with us, and some of our panelists too might be able to jump in and join us. So with that, I'm going to give us a moment of quiet, continue to enjoy my black ginger tea, and wait for the questions to roll in. You're welcome, Sue. Tula, thank you. Yeah, I had a lot of fun today. I learned so much too. I also appreciate what a diverse set of crowd that we have that joined us. Former librarians, not who I would have expected. I didn't know that, Pat. How cool. Before some of you might drop off, can I ask my team, could you go back to the Cybersecurity Awareness Month? And let's go ahead and repost the things that are going on this month on campus. We've already got an after action item to take anybody who's interested on a digital trust tour across the campus. I'm already kind of envisioning what that might look like. But we have a variety of different activities throughout the month of October that are happening. And if you happen to be in the Tempe area and want to join us, we cordially invite you for those. So if you guys could put that slide back up, that'd be awesome. Charles, yeah, let's give a hand to this incredible team. Aaron and Samantha, and there's an entire creative and comms team, Annie and Stephanie, Karina, Seth, there we go. Thank you, thank you, thank you for putting that up. I don't know if that was you, Bayan, but thank you very much if you did that.